Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to the last session of Red Text Radio Week. Very excited to be speaking with Maison and Justin Hach today to talk about digital audio revenue, opportunities, and challenges in 2025. Should be a very interesting panel. Maison is a founder of Atunwa Digital. Atunwa is a media representation firm that enables growth of the digital revenues of African audio and video content producers. And Justin Hach is Director of Digital Sales, Operations, and Products at American Public Media. American Public Media is a producer and distributor of award-winning public radio content. So let's get into it. First, we'll start with the opportunities you see for digital audio revenue in 2025. Mac or Justin, who would like to kick it off?
Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate the opportunity to be part of this Red Tech Radio Week. I would like to kick us off. So in terms of some of the opportunities that I see, because of the fact that digital audio advertising is still in its infancy within the African continent, if you think about the African continent as a whole, we're probably doing about $1.2 billion across 54 countries. Whereas America, for example, is doing close to $60 billion in digital advertising spend, right? So the huge lag in spend is around digital audio. So as far as the opportunities that I see, I think a key area is around the digital advertising growth and how that affects digital audio. So I see digital audio advertising to be one of the key areas to grow across the African continent, and an exciting opportunity for us.
I'll start off by echoing Mac's appreciation for everybody joining today. At American Public Media, as Mac alluded to, we're kind of in the middle of a much more mature digital advertising environment. And a lot of our radio companies, especially smaller operators, are trying to figure out how to take advantage of that. And I think one of the big opportunities there is to build on the strength of what radio has been for a long time, which is the reach and engagement with local audiences, and be able to add the attribution that that digital provides, and really show results for their local advertisers. If we know from long time operation that radio advertising works, how can we measure that, and how can we align that with KPIs and measurements that our advertisers are now using, thanks to their exposure to things like Meta or Google AdWords, and put radio into a little bit more of a apples to apples comparison with those platforms that we have to reckon with are not going away. So how do we make radio buying a complementary piece to what's becoming a more robust and mature digital strategy for advertisers nationwide, globally, and on a super local level?
Justin, that's really interesting, especially attribution, because I've always heard radio has an attribution problem, but not a reach or an effectiveness problem. Could you talk more about specifically how you and then Atunwa are solving the attribution? What does that look like? Because the language between broadcast and digital can be very different, and you're competing against giants here: Facebook, Instagram, etc.
That's a good question. I mean, radio does have a little bit of an attribution challenge, particularly when we're going against things that are really, really hard to dispute, like last click attribution. And I think it comes down to creating ways to show impact on an audience. And for a long time, radio has been kind of side by side with Nielsen as far as describing who their audiences are and how many of those folks there are, and when those folks are listening, but they don't necessarily translate to business outcomes, the Nielsen ratings. And I think figuring out ways to show that a client or an advertiser's investment into a radio station's audience, and then the resultant impact that has made on that audience is probably the best path forward for um, radio operators.
Yeah,
Mac,
and just to add on to that, Tim, when I think about attribution, I'm thinking particularly on the digital side of things, right? So, for example, some of the tools that we're using, obviously, we're using the Stream Guys streams for our audio workflows, and we use the attribution pixels from AdsWiz, which we in turn end up placing within our campaigns so that we can track, okay, this amount of campaigns were delivered to this many audiences across the world. These are the actions that these audiences took. And then once we have the attribution pixels on the landing pages for the campaigns, we're able to easily measure to say, okay, out of all these people who interacted with the campaigns, these are how many audiences actually went to your platform. And then working with the brands and agencies to determine if that fits within their ROI, or adjusting the campaigns to ensure that we can meet the metrics that they're looking to accomplish. So as Tim mentioned, as Justin mentioned, it's much easier to measure digitally. I don't have much exposure to Nielsen and how they do traditional radio measuring, but at least when it comes to your online presence and audiences, it's very easy for you to calculate and determine how many audiences you have and your unique users, where across the world that they're located, and provide that quality information to the brands and agencies to ensure that they are happy with the campaign runs and that that can continue to be revenue sources for the media operators and radio stations.
One last thing on attribution. How does that change the conversation with brands and agencies when you show them that data, or when you talk about the ability to have that data or use that data?
Well, for me, it transforms us from just being an awareness platform, because ultimately they sort of see radio to be awareness play and they're looking for conversions. So this conversation around awareness versus conversions, how do you really articulate that? And you articulate that based on the data. So the quality of the data that we're able to provide the brands and agencies then informs them, okay, yes, we were able to get the awareness and brand reach, but also we were able to get this amount of conversions based on how the campaign was set up as well.
And I can build on that too, and give an example of how we might use kind of in radio's inherent advantages and add digital to make it a stronger campaign, like specifically attribution. So with the presumption that a radio station's audience is a valid audience for a client's product or service, the audience composition is correct. We feel like that it's going to be a good match between product and service and the lifestyle that our audiences have. Radio can also play a part in this, by the way, where we have an awareness message that goes out on the airwaves to the whole group of the whole audience. And then we can use digital channels to kind of drill down and test specific follow-up messaging and measure the effectiveness of that. And you can do that with tools like APM recently signed an agreement with a partnership with Magellan AI. That's a third-party attribution service that we can add pixels to all of our live stream ads and all of our podcast ads. And what it does is it ends up letting our clients independently verify that we've delivered what we say we're going to deliver to who we said we were going to deliver to, and then track all the way down to how many people go over to their website after hearing one of those ads, and then converting to a specific action on their website. So it really lays down some concrete connection between the audio campaign and results over to their platform. And then when you start creating opportunities to test and learn and figure out which messaging is most effective with your audience, you can really start to demonstrate an ROI beyond just traffic to a website. It provides a learning opportunity for the client to see, test and learn what messaging is making the biggest impact on a specific audience.
We have a question from Daniel here, which is a great reminder to everybody. We are taking questions, so please do put them in. Mac or Justin, have either of you used or considered using audio QR codes to make radio ads clickable? We're talking about pixels and attribution like Magellan or Ads was pixels. Is there any other technology you're looking at?
So I have never used audio QR codes, so that's something that I need to look into. How we set up the campaigns is we ensure that the audio campaigns are running with companion banners. And because we have a holistic strategy with the content owners, we're also able to do what we call second screen retargeting, where as the audio jingle and companion banner shows, if that person leaves the stream and they go to the New York Times or CNN, they may see another banner ad to reinforce that campaign. And then we also try to include some video ad opportunities if that format is available as well. But definitely, I would love to learn more about audio QR codes. It's not something that we're currently using, and maybe Justin can have some insights that I can glean on as well.
We are also not using audio QR codes. It's actually a good opportunity to stress the importance of consistency with the way that we present results of our campaigns with advertisers. It's really tempting for radio operators to kind of jump from platform to platform and jump and try new things and then present that as a new solution to their advertisers. But what we've found is that advertisers like data and methodologies and results that are consistent and that they can compare year over year. And it ends up being a little bit taxing to kind of try to parse down, okay, what does this data mean versus the data you were giving me last year? So it doesn't mean that we don't introduce new technologies. It's just that we want to be thoughtful when we bring in a new methodology or a new tool to measure attribution, especially. But even when it's a new distribution platform, we want to be thoughtful in how we're going about that and making sure that it matches not only the client's needs, but also our users, our listeners, thinking about, okay, would our listener really use this in their day-to-day life? And if the answer is no, or maybe, or it needs more thought and research, then it kind of gets maybe tabled until we figure out how it becomes a real thing that we can hang our hats on. The one thing we want to avoid here is putting the results of our campaigns on the shoulders of an untested or unestablished or non-established audience engagement tool. So the short answer is audio QR codes. They're interesting, but it's not something that we've implemented in our daily operations.
Well, let's get into sales, strategy, and distribution. I'll throw this question out for either of you. How do you balance your sales efforts across local, national, and international markets? You're both coming at this from very different perspectives, so I think we'll be interested to hear how you approach that.
Okay, I can lead us off.
You're up.
Yeah. So in terms of our strategy, it's twofold, right? We work across multiple countries where we're doing advertising because the African publishers that we represent, normally on any given day, they have people in 130 different countries accessing their content. So then we start to look at which countries have the most audiences. And then from there, we develop our strategy to determine how our sales operations will work. For what we consider the diaspora markets, that would be audiences that are living in the US, UK, and Europe especially. We work with developed ad networks already, some of which I'm sure you're already familiar with, like the Cats of the world, the DAX of the world, RMSs of the world, to bring us campaigns, right, from a programmatic direct perspective. Then for the African countries, because this is something that is still being developed, we've actually set up our own sales teams in different African countries to originate opportunities. And the importance of this is because we have to do an educational process with the brands and agencies to actually get them acclimated and understand how digital audio advertising works. So a lot of that has to be hands-on and in person, right? So being able to be in country, meeting with them regularly, showcasing the different advertising formats and innovations available, and driving that education process has really helped us in getting adoption. And adoption first starting with doing test campaigns, because they want to see that it's real, and they want to understand, why do I need to switch from traditional radio if everybody listening to the radio is already going to be hearing the ad, to understanding the importance of digital advertising placements for audio and the power of conversions that they can get from audio, and then trying to build that sales funnel to work with them directly to, generate more opportunities for advertising as well. So that's typically been how we've been working our sales teams. As I mentioned, the diaspora audiences, those outside the continent of Africa, we work with pretty strong and well-known ad networks. We do some direct selling there. But for the ones within the African continent, we have our own sales team to drive advertising sales for our clients.
With APM, we've taken a little bit of a different approach, where it's more of about a local focus first. We know that our partners on the publisher side, which are the local public media organizations, their challenges kind of span. There's multiple challenges there. One is they recognize that they need to embrace digital, and they need to understand how it works and what their new set of competitors are, because that's the digital competition out there is fundamentally different than what they've done with other radio stations in whatever market they're working in. But acknowledging that digital is something that they have to embrace, but also maintaining their broadcast selling proposition, because for pretty much every traditional broadcaster, it's still their number one revenue source, and it's not something that we can just throw out and move on. It's something that we need to understand how to bridge the gap between traditional broadcast sales and digital sales, acknowledging that there's two sets of competition with each one, but understanding what is the common value proposition between those two platforms. And we've recognized that that really what it is the audience that we serve, and that we derive engagement from, and the ability to influence those folks, and then measure attribution on top of that. So the platform approach, when we're talking to an advertiser, really should be agnostic. And this goes to a question that popped up on the screen here about how sales teams are adapting their approach to a convergent market here, a multimedia market. And it really comes down to a couple things. One is it's recognizing what your true strengths are, which is a super focused audience that you can engage every day. And you have a sales team likely that's going to have that one-to-one connection with folks. They're going to be able to not just spit out results from an algorithm, but they're going to be able to help solve a problem. They're going to help understand what a client's problem is, and they're going to help propose a solution. What digital actually does is it adds that extra layer of attribution and proof that those solutions worked or did not, and maybe needs to be adjusted. The other part of that is the methodology of selling. Understanding that in the new generation, most buyers, especially on the agency side, are moving farther and farther away from the methodology of selling by spots or buying by spots and spot schedules, the way linear broadcasting has always been done. It's moving more towards the direction of impressions and targeted impressions, and the understanding that the more targeted you go, the more you're going to have to invest in that cost per thousand. And understanding that there has to be a reconciliation there between meeting those buyers with a measurement that they understand and want to buy, and bringing it back to what traditional radio has always been, which is it's a focused reach product. So broadcast still has a place in it. And I'll give an example. We've been working on the idea of selling our radio campaigns as impression-based rather than a spot schedule. It's an impression goal that we sell alongside our digital product, which is obviously also an impression goal. And it ends up showing that broadcast is still really efficient. It's an efficient CPM, and then it also justifies the higher CPM on digital, because digital creates a little bit more of a focused funnel for the advertiser. One last thing I'd like to add in here is, and it's something that we're investing in at APM, which is what we call the smart CPM, which is adding data and insights on top of those impressions that we're delivering. So an advertiser is not just buying 1 million impressions and hoping that it worked. They're buying 1 million impressions and, of course, finding out that it was delivered as promised, but also learning something from that. How can we help them take advantage of our access to that audience and let them learn something about that audience that they wouldn't have just by placing a campaign? That's something that we believe is a great use of our sales team's time, to be able to not only say, okay, yes, advertiser, we delivered your campaign, but here's what we learned for you as well. You can take these and use those lessons as you want to. So I think there's to give an example of something that they can learn. We can test things like messaging. We can test it with digital. We can test things like specific messaging, where there's like a broadcast message at the top that everybody gets, and then certain geographies or certain demographies get another message, a follow-up message that we can tell a story, and then we can measure which stories are more effective amongst our audience. Another way that we can test is through timing. This is another thing where we can with streaming or podcasts, we can day part different ad campaigns, and that's something that we can learn really quickly through the course of a campaign. Where are we getting the most response? Are people listening to these things in the morning? Are they listening to them while they're sitting at their desk at work, or after they get home? And these are the types of insights that we can share with clients that help them, hopefully when they renew with us, put together a little bit more informed campaign to take advantage of our audience access.
It's great, Justin. What I'm hearing from both of you is that it's an educational process for your clients, but also for the sales teams. Mac, is there anything that in any situations where you've had to educate an agency or a brand, or educate your sales teams on how to sell digital and the different languages between broadcast and digital?
Absolutely. So first, we deal directly with the publisher to let them know that you can't sell digital as a complement to your traditional radio, because there needs to be a value assigned to digital advertising. And if you do that, then it really limits the opportunities that we have to create value for your digital properties. And once we are aligned with the publishers there, then internally we are equipping our sales teams to also provide ad operation support. One thing we've really noticed is that, yes, agencies and brands, so for example, OMD Nigeria, looking to run a campaign for our client Diageo, they brought us the brief and gave us the targeting requirements and said, Mac, because you know the platform best, we want your knowledge on how we should set up the campaign, how we should run the campaign, and how we should, set up the measurement, right? So we've increasingly been realizing that as part of our value add is to provide ad operation support to the agencies so that we set up the campaigns for them. We give them access to our dashboard so that they can track the campaigns in real time. And then we can do the A and B testing with them to determine how the delivery is going and make the adjustments accordingly. So those are some of the things that we've had to institute with our sales team that is starting to bring us a lot more success.
Thanks, Mac. So let's touch on the mix of direct sales and programmatic. Like I said before, you're both coming at this from a little bit of different angles. How do you see programmatic versus direct sales playing a role in your operations?
Well, just to take the lead here, programmatic to me is a little bit problematic just because of the swings and uncertainties of plugging in ad networks and determining how they're going to be able to bring you business throughout the year. So we like to focus on direct sales first and being able to accomplish a healthy deal flow and funnel for direct sales, and then use programmatic as sort of the backup to ensure that we are increasing the fill rates as much as possible. So even within the programmatic setup that we have, yes, we try to include multiple partners for each of the countries, but nevertheless, within each of these waterfalls, we try to get as much guarantees as possible, right? So are we able to get a minimum impression guarantee from a particular ad network? If that's the case, then we slot them in to essentially have preferred buying opportunities programmatically, and then add everybody else within the waterfall. But as I said, direct sales is really the key focus because then we are in control of our future and destiny as much as possible.
We think that programmatic has a spot in our sales mix. It's something that we've tested through, and we think that it's a good opportunity to fill through unsold inventory where it lands. However, I agree with Mac that direct sales is going to be where we make where we have our biggest revenue opportunity or upside potential. And the reason is because we have more control over those campaigns. We have opportunities to learn. We have the opportunity to add first-party data and attribution on top of direct campaigns. And it just shows a little bit more. It gives us more of an opportunity to demonstrate an ROI on an ad campaign. Programmatic is it's tough to deny the advantages of it. It's really easy to place an ad campaign. You get a focused audience, but you don't necessarily get a consistent user experience. And that's something that direct sales with a trusted media provider can bring to an advertiser. I think those two things are complementary and they can play side by side, and that you're not necessarily going to see one of them perform better than the other when you do a side by side comparison. A little bit of a hidden advantage with programmatic for those publishers who do run it. You can start to see it as a sales prospecting tool. You can start to see which types of businesses and industries business categories are trying to reach your listeners. And if for example, one of our larger programs is Marketplace. It's distributed all over the country, and there's programmatic inventory or ads that are placed against some of that unsold inventory, and we can really see quickly who or what types of businesses want to reach our audiences there, and in turn, we can pick up the phone and start reaching out to those businesses, and tell them about the benefits of a direct buy.
Great point, Justin.
Bala has a question here about video platforms and how audio providers can differentiate themselves and sustain revenue growth while ensuring advertisers see comparable value in audio-only formats. We were planning to talk about video. So, Mac, would you be willing to talk about how Atunwa sees video platforms, both opportunities and threats?
Sure. So just in addressing Bala's question first, we have a publisher in Ghana called Multimedia Group Limited. They're the top media company in Ghana and West Africa, for that matter. And one of the strategies that we work with them on is, yes, YouTube is a place where people are monetizing. They have video streams available for their radio stations. But what they end up doing is creating teasers of, certain content that would drive the audiences back to their platform to listen to the digital only versions, right? So some presenter will come on and say that if you'd like to hear more of this program, come to our website or mobile application and access the podcast to continue listening to this particular program. So that's been one of the areas where we've seen some success. Some of the challenges, which are quite real, especially in the African context for video, is certain platforms that get a lot of audiences, like Facebook or a Twitter, are not highly monetized within Africa. It might be different in the US and other countries, but within the African continent, there's not a lot of monetization revenue that are coming from Twitter or Facebook, but you have a lot of audiences that are accessing content there as well. So I see that to be a huge threat because the media companies aren't necessarily sure how best to go about monetizing it. But some of the strategies that we have consulted to put in place are like the squeeze back. So that little frame in the video that showcases different advertisements or sponsorships. But then again, a lot of the content are set as teasers where it would be like a 2-3 minute clip that is generated to lead audiences back to the publisher's owned and operated platforms to do advertising. To perform advertising, especially around digital audio.
Justin, how's American public media approaching video?
It's a work in progress. It's something that obviously American public media and a lot of our publishing constituents, our affiliates, are audio first producers and not necessarily video producers. And we're finding that the approaches to video are uneven. What platforms do we choose? What types of content do we put up there? Do we try to pull people back into our own owned and operated channels? Do we let them be where they are on YouTube, for example, where it's much tougher to monetize at any scale unless you have a really big channel? And it goes back to one of those things, or what I mentioned earlier, where if there's an inconsistent result in the delivery and the format, it's hard to justify putting an advertiser's success or failure of their campaign on the back of that. And so it's something that we feel like we have a lot of space a lot of runway here with audio that we can expand on, and understanding that it's also a growth channel to win the hearts and minds of listeners, that we want to make sure we're doing that the best we can. Now, that said, video is a great way to gain reach and scale and introduce introduce folks that use those platforms to your content then that they might not have ever found otherwise. But there's plenty of stats out there to prove that platforms like YouTube or Instagram or Twitter or X, those are really sticky. It's tough to pull people off of those platforms to and then bring them over to your own channels without a lot of extra work and a lot of extra content promise. So Mac already mentioned a few ideas that to monetize video directly on those platforms. The only thing I would add in there is to make sure that you do it with a belief that your audience is going to be at least predictable in size. I wouldn't suggest throwing advertisers on the back of a campaign that you're just trying, or a piece of content that you're just starting, or that you don't know how it's going to land with folks out there in the world. And I think so consistency, making sure that your delivery platform is consistent, your audience size is consistent, and working with your content teams to make sure that the execution is consistent as well.
Got it. Interesting question from Daniel here. What percentage of listeners are on broadcast versus streaming for a typical program across the country? Do either of you have any insights or opinions on what that distribution looks like?
So for us, the majority of the publishers that we work with, it varies from the country. Let's just take Kenya as an example. Interestingly, and I think it's because the cost of internet is much cheaper in Kenya in comparison to other African countries, that you actually see a lot more audiences from Kenya accessing the streams than oftentimes, what you would get for traditional radio, which to me is always quite interesting, right? Whereas in countries like Ghana, Nigeria, where internet access is much more expensive, you start to see that those living outside, especially like the countries where, those Africans move to the most, which would be like UK, Italy, Germany, US, and Canada, that the streaming traffic there is much higher than the streaming traffic that you see locally as well, right? So it's really contingent upon what the internet connectivity costs are that would inform how much more people are listening online. So just as a typical example, when I look at the monthly internet usage for streaming across our top 3 countries, Ghana, Nigeria, and Kenya, Kenya is doing 3 times as much internet bandwidth consumption to stream versus Ghana, right? So, or even the same for Nigeria. And Nigeria is a country of 200 million people. Kenya is a country of 52 million people, right? Just to give you an example of the population samples.
In the U.S., so most of our markets, and I'll speak to, for example, Minnesota, which is APM's backyard, and also an affiliate for the organization. We can monitor broadcast usage versus digital usage. We get Nielsen measurements on the broadcast side, and then of course we have several options to measure our live streams on the digital side. And bandwidth issue isn't necessarily a challenge in the US. Most folks have smartphones with data-rich plans that don't prevent them from streaming when they would want to. But we do see behavioral changes throughout the day. So for example, we can measure that our broadcast audiences spike up during the morning and afternoon drives home from work, from the office. And then in the middle, we see our live stream spike up. So we can, that to us, that looks like an opportunity to tell a story to our advertisers, where you have that that radio broadcast reach in the morning and in the afternoon, or in the later afternoon, to let people know that you're out there. And then when people are sitting at their desks and streaming the same programming, here's an opportunity to expand on that story and add a little context and add a little bit of consideration. And so pairing those two things together, and again, it's about painting that picture of how our users engage with our content and potentially a sponsor's message.
Telling that story to advertisers is so important. I continuously read about audio not getting the full share of wallet compared to its share of attention, meaning there's more time spent streaming and listening to podcasts than audio is getting the advertising dollars for. What kind of stories are you telling agencies and brands, or what are they telling you when you have those types of conversations to try and get radio and digital and podcast your fair share of the wallet?
Well, Justin, did you want to? Okay.
Go for it.
So, for us on the African continent, radio is still king of media. So in terms of the options between radio and television, just thinking traditional radio and television, radio is still the most preferred media consumption across the continent of Africa. So when we're going to brands and agencies, they already have this understanding that radio is wildly popular. It's just that they're not used to spending their budgets on digital audio campaigns. So as Justin mentioned, when you're able to show them the data to say, hey, I have this amount of people that are consuming the content digitally, these are the areas that they're located in, these are the areas that I know that you're selling your products, I believe that once we're able to place these campaigns for you, we can easily track and measure the delivery so that you have the quality reporting as the agency to present to the brand to really show them the ROI on their budget spend, right? So that has been part of the educational process that we're continuing to go through, is just informing them that this is what's available. And another great thing is, because podcasts have become so popular, it makes our selling of podcasts much easier, because even before we present a podcast for sale, the agency's already asking us, what podcast do you have in your portfolio? Can you share a little bit more? I've been listening to this particular podcast. Is there an opportunity for us to broadcast against it? A clear example is we were talking to an agency in Kenya, and they just out of nowhere asked, Mac, do you know if there are any people in Kenya listening to true crimes podcasts? Because that's one of my favorites. This is what the agency person was telling us. And as we looked through, we realized that, yes, there were quite a few people in Kenya listening to true crimes. And then that kind of garnered a bit more interest from the agency about the podcast we had available, because then they realized that not only did we have the local podcasters available, but through certain partnerships we have, like with AdsWiz, we had access to international podcasters. And that became a key selling point to them, because then they could aggregate all of the local and international podcasters that had Kenyan audiences and advertise against that.
When we're telling our story to an advertiser or to a client or an agency, I think one of the things that we need to remember, and this is something that we learned in a series of conversations with major agencies across the country, is that they're kind of past learning what we're all about, and they're more interested in understanding what we can do for them, and figuring out, demonstrating that we can help solve a problem for them. And whether that's done with broadcast, or if that's done with digital channels, I think the approach to selling radio as a channel or as a medium versus selling digital as a medium, broadcasters are already at a disadvantage, especially with younger buyers that maybe have a bias against the effectiveness of the platform. But if we can go in there and kind of change the conversation and just say, okay, we have all these tools available to you to solve your problem, whether that's you want to reach X number of people over 35, if you want to tell people about an event you have coming up. There's plenty of ways tools we have in our kit here to help you do that. And everything that we're going to introduce, whether it's broadcast or digital or newsletters or whatever, they're going to have a purpose in there to accomplishing that goal. And we'll be able to explain to you why we're adding something into that recommendation. And but it comes down to, again, it's not necessarily the channel you're on, but it's more about the access you have to a certain group of people. That's really kind of the competitive advantage that that radio stations carry every day. We used to joke about this, that if we were launching a new website, wouldn't it be great if we had a radio station that was talking about it all the time to a group of people? And the point there is that there's a big advantage of owning more than one channel, and I think and being able to tell that story and connect those two things, a cohesive message across multiple channels, is really the way to take advantage of the attention that we have from our users and explain the value proposition for a client.
Mac, earlier you said something about selling other content, selling the other podcasts internationally that weren't actually the podcasts of your clients. How does that strategy tie in here? Because Justin's talking about having access to a large audience. Sometimes you might not have direct access to that audience. What techniques and strategies are you taking around audience extension, and how are those paying off or not paying off?
Great question, Tim. So as you mentioned, sometimes the brands and agencies are looking for more inventory than the clients we represent have. So we have reseller agreements in place with top international publishers. One of them being SiriusXM, where we're able to leverage the audiences that they have accessing content within the territories that we've agreed on. So for us, it's been within the African country to, in essence, resell. So we do that to be a complement to the inventories that our clients have. And it's been great because we've run into certain situations where brand new agencies that we've never worked with before may prefer one particular music streaming platform that we're not working with, but we need that to open the door so that they can start buying from the rest of our publishers. So because we have that sort of relationship with SiriusXM, we're able to tap into their network to make that music streaming platform available to the advertiser. And once they're satisfied with the results from those campaigns, then it intrigues them to say, oh, okay, I'm in Ghana. I know that you're also working with these particular local publishers. Are we going to be able to get the same or better results from them? And normally I would say yes, because the platform setups are typically the same, with the SDKs and APIs are already integrated, right? So once that first campaign has been a success, then it's able to allow us to bring our other publishers to also experience, budgets from the agencies as well.
Justin, did you have anything to add on that topic?
No, I think Mac hit that really well.
Okay, excellent. I wanted to go back to the video topic. I think I saw a question there for a second. Put it back up. Okay.
Okay, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
Noted.
Let's go back to the video for a second. Do you see runway in the future for monetizing video more effectively? 3 to 5 years down the road, because I continue to see and hear that video is becoming more and more a part of audio podcasting. So I think it's certainly an important strategy for us to be looking at this point in the industry.
From my perspective, as long as we continue to allow the likes of YouTube and Facebook and Twitter or even TikTok to sort of manage that process, then it makes it increasingly hard from a programmatic perspective. So for video, we tend to look at a sponsorship model where we can include the inventories from the owned and operated platforms, meaning the video inventories that our publishers, websites, and mobile applications have, and then adding the numbers from their social media platforms to create like a sponsorship package, which in turn we go to the brands and agencies to sell against, right? But as far as those platforms still being closed off to you actually plugging in your advertising opportunities, then it becomes much more challenging, even going into the future, because then people get so comfortable with not doing anything but getting some earnings that they're not compelled to do the hard work to sell for themselves.
I agree with that. I mean, with the control that platforms have, like YouTube or Meta, I mean, those platforms are built intentionally for YouTube and Meta to make money, not necessarily the publishers that are on them. And AdWords or AdSense is a way to make money, but it's not a direct campaign monetization tool. I think the ability to going back to that consistency message, the ability to consistently promise a client a certain type of integration or a certain placement or a certain attribution or measurement of their campaign it's tough to do when you don't hold the keys to the car. And so from a monetization standpoint, it's tough to build a long-term strategy based on one of those platforms unless you're willing to accept the rules of the road there, and that they could change at any time. There's the way most folks have monetized on YouTube, for example, outside of AdSense, is essentially a response to the limitations of the platform, or the limitations that YouTube places on them. And there's still some big gaps there in the measurement or the attribution of how successful that placement was. For example, if a YouTuber mentions like a baked-in read on one of their videos, you see video views, and you might be able to see some demographic info on that video itself, but it's hard to track back people who've watched that video and therefore gone and taken an action for the advertiser. So beyond that, it's tough to see any movement at all unless you have really, really big scale on one of those platforms, because we're talking about fractions of an audience are actually going to take action on a message like that. But from a content perspective and gaining audience, video is still a great tool. And if we're going to add it or recognize a sponsor or something on video, it's a great thing to add into an overall package, but it's not something that we're going to promise any X number of impressions or delivery metrics against. We'll build that into channels that we can kind of control, whether it's digital audio or broadcast. We can control how many impressions an advertiser gets on those channels, and then the video is actually part of an overall sponsorship package. That's great to have, and it's a nice focal point of the sponsorship, but it's not necessarily a driver of measurable impressions.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Well, we're here at 5 minutes left. Just want to give you both an opportunity to either one, talk about another opportunity or threat, since that's what we're here to talk about for digital audio, or two, give us a crazy prediction for what's going to happen in the next year or two in digital audio.
Okay,
Or
so
3, answer Daniel's question.
I will discuss some of the threats. I don't really have any feedback for Daniel's question. That's a little bit out of my purview. So in terms of some of the threats that we've seen, one of the key threats is still content piracy. You have your digital content out there. You've worked so hard to get the funds to place the content out there, then some random third-party aggregator is lifting your content using their own stream URLs in order to make money off of that content. So we still see that to be a very huge pain point. I mean, of course, we've gone through the process of DMCA takedowns. We've had to take down some people's mobile applications, and they've come back begging for us to bring it back, that they would remove the content altogether. So for me, that is still one of the key threats, where you could have a very popular third-party aggregator who is receiving links from different parties that may not be associated with you and placing the content on there, and they're getting huge audiences, and you're not benefiting anything from that as well. That's one key threat. Another threat is internet connectivity. So I'm hoping that the successive governments in these African countries are able to institute laws that actually allow for more affordable internet access. And that would in turn help the publishers who are producing this content and placing it online being able to afford internet connectivity. And then also for audiences that are accessing from within the African countries, they'd also have an opportunity to gain more content and spend less outright as well. In terms of predictions, one of the predictions that I have is I foresee CPMs getting higher. Yes, you have Google, and I believe Google has not done well to help prop up CPM pricing when people go to Google Ads to make placements. But publishers are increasingly learning how best to ensure that they can, take some of their content away from Google Ads and place a premium on it. So I'm predicting that at least we're going to start to see some CPM prices rising across the African continent.
I like it. Justin, take one of those 3.
Yeah. I mean, really quickly, the CPB funding, I'll just remind folks that, I mean, of course, we're monitoring that, but between direct support from underwriters or sponsors and our actual members, that makes up the vast majority of our funding. And as a nonprofit, obviously that gets all pushed back into creating great content and kind of fulfilling our mission. So it's not, it's something that we're watching, but there's plenty of other things for us to focus on to make sure that our larger revenue sources are maintained throughout the future. Speaking to kind of building on Mac's point, though, the ease to create content and where we might see AI generated content that's kind of infiltrated YouTube and some of the other major social media platforms. That's probably going to make its way to radio or to audio as well, especially on the digital side and podcasts. And I think that's also an opportunity for professional broadcasters to position themselves as a counter to that. If certain platforms start to become known as a place where it's infiltrated with AI unreliable content, even though that may be algorithmically driven, it's an opportunity for broadcasters to set themselves out as still locally relevant, still somebody with human eyes and ears on there and watching how it's affecting their audiences. And I think it's something that advertisers are probably going to appreciate in the future, that that their message is next to content that somebody is, like a human being, is actively watching and maintaining.
Well, Mac and Justin, I really appreciate your time and expertise today. And everybody who's here, thank you for attending Radio Week 2025. We'll look forward to seeing you again in 2026. This session and all the other sessions will be available online at redtech.pro, so you can go back and listen to it or watch it and share it with your colleagues. Thanks for your time. Have a great weekend.